ago on Coffee with Yaasha, I talked about how disability and chronic illness are represented in fiction. And I shared a little bit about my own chronic illness story and how it affects how I see those types of characters portrayed in fiction. And my video was actually prompted by a blog post that I saw by Hannah Heath. And she has her own experience with chronic illness as well. And she wrote this just long, detailed, but incredibly awesome, totally worth the time to read it, blog post. And that's what inspired me to even talk about it, like, oh yeah, right, this is something I really care about too. And anyway, so then I got in touch with Hannah Heath herself, and I was like, hey, would you mind doing a video interview, and then can I put it up on my channel? Can we talk about this topic and bring a little more awareness? And she very enthusiastically replied, yes, I'd love to do it. So you get a treat. It's a little longer than my normal videos, but boy, we had such a great time chatting and learning more about each other and talking about this very important topic for both of us, and I think you're really gonna enjoy it. So here's the video. Welcome to my channel. This is Yaasha Moriah. I'm a sci-fi and fantasy author, and I have a chronic illness. And that's what we're talking about today. We're talking about disabilities and chronic illness. And with me today, I have Hannah Heath. Who is also a fantasy author and who has her own story as well about chronic illness and disability. So, Heather, tell me briefly about yourself and what's going on with you.
Great. All right. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me on. I'm super excited. So my name is Hannah Heath. I'm a writer of Christian speculative fiction and author of The Torn Universe, which is an expanded universe of sci-fi and fantasy short stories. My publications include titles such as The Terror of the Tree Chronicles, which are origin stories of deadly assassins in my expanded universe. Cool. Ooh, yeah. And my most recent publication is This Pain Inside, which is an underwater science fantasy short story with an own voices character who, like me, has chronic pain. I'm also the multimedia manager for the Phoenix Fiction Writers. So the Phoenix Fiction Writers are a group of 9 indie authors of science fiction and fantasy, and together we work together to market stories and also to publish anthologies together, like our newest one.
Lovely. Yeah, I heard about that one.
Yeah.
I heard it's really good too, so I want to get my hands on it.
It is, and I'm totally not biased, but it's amazing.
Cool beans. Yeah. So, and tell me about your history with chronic illness and pain.
Yeah, so I have chronic Lyme disease. I've had it at least since I was 12 years old. That's when the symptoms started manifesting. So a lot of those symptoms are chronic pain, just like nerve pain, joint pain, muscular pain, any kind of pain you can think of. Yeah. Unfortunately, I have it everywhere. So there's pain and then fatigue, and then just different fun things like anxiety and depression, and then just other random symptoms. Like sometimes if I overwork myself, my brain will switch into like dyslexia mode, and then it's hard to read and write things. So it's very bizarre.
Not easy for being a writer, is it?
No, I always laugh because my hands hurt when I write, and sometimes I'm dyslexic, so for all intents and purposes, I should not be writing and publishing stories.
But you don't let that stop you.
Right. So
good for you. So can you tell me a little bit, as we dig deeper into your health experience, can you tell me how your life changed when your health changed, or I mean, since you're 12 years old, how you're different than other people?
Yeah, so it changed everything. When I first started experiencing symptoms, I was 12, and there aren't a lot of 12-year-olds with chronic pain, so it was very isolating. I struggled with fairly severe depression, but at the time I didn't realize that that's what it was.
But that's understandable. You weren't able to do the same things that a lot of 12-year-olds were able to do.
Right. So, like, I loved to surf and work out, and so I would see my friends all get their surfboards and go off surfing, and I'd be kind of sitting at home thinking, I want to go too. So that was really difficult. So as you can imagine, it really affected my relationships with other people, because it was difficult to connect with people my age who weren't in pain, and even connect with anybody because, you know, chronic pain is very difficult to process, especially as a young person. And so I was just very angry and very sad, and I couldn't figure out how to keep living my life in a productive way when I felt like everything was kind of turned upside down.
Do you think that's what pushed you toward writing, or is that you found your voice in writing?
Yeah, so I had loved writing previous to this, but at that point I couldn't do anything else really, and so I thought, well, my hands hurt, but I can still write, not as much as I used to, but I'm gonna go for it. And my first story, Skies of Dripping Gold, did delve into issues of pain and how to hold on to or find faith when you're in pain, because that was a big issue for me. When I first got chronic Lyme disease, it almost wrecked my faith. But I came out of it the other side, and I feel like it has made me a stronger person and helped my faith grow more than it ever would have if I didn't have this. So even though it really sucks and I wish I didn't have it, I think in some ways it has made me a better person. So it's a weird balance.
Right. So when you say came out the other side of this, you're not saying that you no longer have Lyme disease or the issues associated with it. You're saying that you have found a new normal and a new peace with that normal.
Exactly. Actually, a new normal, I wrote a blog post about this, and I told them, like, what normal feels like. And so for me, normal is being in pain and being tired, and struggling with different psychological issues. But I've learned to find my balance with that and know that even if I don't feel good, that doesn't mean that I can't lead a life that glorifies God, and a life that's worth living.
Yeah, that's something I resonate with a lot, because I also was diagnosed with Lyme disease after many years of searching for a diagnosis, right? And that whole before and after, you feel like you are not yourself, you feel really lost, and it's interesting how much of your identity you put into what you can do instead of who you are, especially who you are in Christ. And so, those feelings of like, I'm lost, what do I do, what's my new normal, and then learning to find peace with it and have a productive life and enjoy your life regardless, right? So how have people responded to your health? How did they respond when your health changed? And then how have they responded when they learned that you have Lyme disease? Yeah,
so this is always really complicated for me, at least describing how people initially responded, because at first there was so much love. There was people would cook, because I'm not the only one in my family who's sick. My parents both are as well.
Oh no.
And so we all started kind of showing symptoms at the same time, and so we did have lots of church members and family members and friends like come together, and they would support us by bringing meals and praying with us, and it was amazing. But then as time went on and I got increasingly frustrated with feeling sick and going to church and hearing all these sermons about, you know, God heals people, and I was sitting there thinking, well, he doesn't heal me, what is that all about? And so I started withdrawing, and I kind of removed myself from a lot of those circles, and so in turn I'm no longer in touch with a lot of people that I was initially. So that's always hard, because I do think that that was largely because of me. But then there were other responses that were very difficult to stomach. People who would, you know, quote Bible verses about, like, if you have enough faith, you will, you know, be healed. And
oh, I've gotten that.
yeah, and I think that they do honestly mean well, but it was so hard. And then people who would constantly, all they wanted to do was talk to me about how I was feeling and what treatments are you trying, and have you tried this, and have you looked at this, and I found this thing. And so it was very hard. I felt like after a certain point people saw me as the girl who's sick, and I didn't want to be the girl who was sick. And so it was very difficult for me to continue in circles of people who knew me before I was sick.
So you shifted almost from an identity of the person you were before you were sick and what you were able to do to this identity of, oh, this is the sick girl and this is the only thing we know to talk to her about.
Yes.
Yeah. That's hard.
To be clear, I don't blame any of those people. Like, I know chronic illness is strange and a lot of people don't know how to respond.
Yeah.
And
they want to show sympathy and they want to be kind and ask you how you're doing. And since that is such a life-changing thing, it's kind of the most obvious thing.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that was difficult. And then since then, meeting new people who didn't know me before I was sick.
Right.
Always a little bit iffy because I'm in college and I don't look sick. I often am met with a lot of skepticism from professors who don't want to give me disability accommodations to classmates who don't really understand why I can't do certain things. Or
there's almost like this moment where you're like, I just want to paint like some nasty looking something on myself, so it's like, look, it's visible.
Right.
You can see it.
Right. Yeah. It's like, I swear I'm not faking. I feel real bad. Yeah, so there's a lot of that, and a lot of people who are initially very uncomfortable around me when they realize what I have, because they don't know how to respond and they don't want to say the wrong thing. And then
you just kind of keep your distance altogether.
Yeah, or just don't ever bring it up again. So they like to pretend that that's not something that exists.
Right.
And then another thing is I call it the look, and I'm sure that you're familiar with this, is when you talk about not feeling well and then this look comes over the person's face and it's just like sheer pity of like, oh, poor you. And it's really difficult for me. It's like one of my least favorite things. Yeah. I don't pity myself. I don't want pity. And then I feel the need to then convince them, like, oh, you don't have to feel bad, it's okay. And then the roles are reversed, and I'm the one that's having to make people feel better when I'm the one that doesn't feel good.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. But then there are the occasional just amazing people who know exactly what to say. They say, you're doing great, you're strong, I'm really proud of you, and I'm praying for you.
Right, and they have that balance between asking you how you're doing and genuinely acknowledging your illness versus, and while at the same time they're, acknowledging you as a full person and a whole person and not a half a person because you have an illness.
Exactly.
Right.
And those people are just amazing, so I think the world needs more of those. There's no empty promises or misquoted Bible verses or pity or the weird shifty eyes or,
or the luck.
Yes. So, and they're great, so just shout out to all those people. We appreciate you.
I had those people in my life too, and they're gold. And they're the sort of person that for me, when I'm, not able to drive myself that day, I'm feeling sick, I'm like, hey, do you mind being my chauffeur? And they understand, they get it. They're like, oh, sure. And they just treat it like it's a normal thing versus them doing something special for somebody who's disabled,
Yeah.
Yeah. So, what are 3 of the most common mistakes that you see writers making when they portray disabled or chronically ill characters?
Yeah. So, it took me a while to narrow this list down to 3, but I think I got it.
Well, I know, right? Because I remember reading your blog post, and you had like pages and pages, and I'm like, this is great stuff. But we would be here all day if we talked about all of it.
I know. Yeah. So I think my biggest issue is basically like the character building version of the look. It's where the author is just very clearly pitying the character who is disabled. And this leads to all kinds of problems. It leads to kind of othering disabled people and thinking like, well, they're not the same as other people, and so they deserve to be pitied and not necessarily like looked up to or seen as equals. And it also leads to writing off poor behavior because, oh, they're disabled, so, you know, this villain's disabled and that's fine because they can be evil because they don't feel good. And so this is just them balancing that out, and that's, you know, it sends a lot of very bad messages about disability and disabled people.
Yeah. If you're in that much pain, you deserve to be psychotic. Like, what's the message, you know?
Yeah, like that doesn't make sense.
No.
So that one's the biggest one. The second one is disability being the character's defining trait, where they don't really seem to have interest outside of their disability. Their entire life is centered around what they can't do, and that's
what they can.
Exactly, because disabled people are so cool. Like, they are able to overcome so much.
Yeah, on a daily basis for things that we just take for granted.
Right. So I would like to see more of an appreciation for that in fiction. That'd be great.
Yeah.
And then the third one is the social ramifications of having a disability are usually shown and go no further than showing a character being bullied, and then as a result the character being either fearful or angry. When in reality, like, disability has more than that kind of impact. Like, for me, like I'd mentioned, it can be very isolating. It can really make you start to question your self-worth or your worth to people around you. It can, depending on where you're at, it can also make you feel very strong because you know that you can, you know, wake up in tons of pain but still get out of bed and
still do the things. Yeah.
Yeah.
I've done it before, I can do it again.
Exactly. So just kind of writers who don't take the time to research all of the different social and personal impacts that disability can have on a person, and instead just go for bullying, and then that's it.
Right. Yeah, there's a lot. It's not as cut and dry as a lot of people would try to make it out to be. So what do you say, having talked about all that, right? What would you say would be your ideal representation of chronic illness and disability in fiction?
Yes. So
fun stuff.
Ideally, yeah, I always get so excited about this. Just a character whose disability is normalized. It's not shown as this thing to be pitied or afraid of. It's not othered. The character's really strong and complex, and also, like, surprise, happens to have a disability or a chronic illness.
Right.
It's not solely their purpose in the story. The story doesn't have to center around only their struggle with their illness or disability.
Right.
It doesn't have to be the point of the book. It can just be, you can show them fighting these issues while also going on their own non-disability related adventures. So I'd really just love to see more disabled characters popping up in
Absolutely.
fiction. That's just these normal people.
I wonder if sometimes the reason people don't even portray disabled characters is because the authors are terrified that it might be limiting to them. You know, that, well, if this person is hampered by pain, or if they have mobility issues or whatever, they can't be this great hero gallivanting off with their sword or flying off in their spaceship doing great deeds of daring do, you know, which is, and I think sometimes people with sci-fi or fantasy kind of magic their way out or technology their way out of the situation instead of dealing with it realistically and saying, like, hey, we can still do this stuff. We just have to do it differently than everybody else would.
Yeah, it's like, rather than spending time on it, they give the character a magic potion, or like, oh, you're missing an arm, let me give you a cybernetic arm, you're good to go now. And I'm like, oh, you had such a cool opportunity. So I do think it's the lack of portrayal is people being unwilling to take the time to research and see how they can make their character fit into the world they've built. Right. And I get a lot of comments on my blog whenever I talk about disability, people who say that they're nervous they're going to get it wrong. And that always makes me really sad, because I think if you go talk to people with disabilities or chronic illnesses and really put time into reading books by us or watching videos or even interacting online, following hashtags, like, you will be able to get enough information so that you can do this in a really cool and sensitive way.
Well, I know for myself, if I got a fellow writer who wrote to me and was like, hey, I need to know more about, you know, the types of things that you have, can we dialogue about this? I'd be like, yes, awesome, I will tell you all about it. Yes. You know, and obviously my experience is not necessarily representative of everybody else's experience, but it can give a good framework.
Right. Yeah, and that's a good thing to remember, is you can talk. It's important to talk to more than one disabled person, because obviously we're not all the same. We're both chronically ill. I'm sure we experience different things. So while we would have a lot of things in common, there might be some things that aren't. But yeah, just reach out to people, because like you, whenever I get emails or direct messages from people wanting to know more, I'm like, yes, I will talk to you about this. Let's do it. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So, can you name some authors for me who have represented disability and chronic illness well in their books?
Yes.
You can plug for yourself as well.
All right, thank you. So first, this book is incredible on so many levels. It's The Electrical Menagerie by Molly E. Reeder, and it has not one, but two disabled characters, which is unfortunately very rare, because apparently like only one disabled character can
kind of get your token disabled person in the story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that book is amazing. It deals with a character who has pain and mobility issues, and she does a great job talking about all of the social aspects and the self-esteem aspects, and it's just so good. So I love that one.
Well, check, that's going on my TBR list.
And it is like fantasy steampunk with kind of a magic show element. So just everything about that book is amazing.
Oh, I'm totally sold on it now. Yes.
Yeah. And then there's a classic, Gathering Blue by Lois Lowry.
I read that.
Yes.
It's beautiful.
I love that book. So that one has a character with mobility issues. She uses super cool. And then Irelia the Nightwalker by Beth Wangler, who's one of my fellow Phoenix fiction writers. The protagonist is blind, and just Wangler does this amazing job of... So there's a common trope for disabled characters where they're very put upon and nobody really likes them and they're discriminated against. They go off and do something very heroic, and suddenly like they're treated equally and everybody loves them.
Right.
And it's very messed up for a lot of reasons, specifically that it kind of sends the message that disabled people need to prove themselves in order to gain equality. But she flips that completely on its head, and it's amazing.
Awesome.
And then Dragon School by Sarah K.L. Wilson. It's a girl
anything that has dragon in it, I'm sold on.
Yes, exactly. I saw this cover, and it was this girl on a dragon with a cane, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. Yeah.
So what's the representation in there?
So that is a mobility disability as well, which I'm realizing is very common in fantasy. So it's a character who uses a cane because she was born with a bad leg.
Okay.
And then as for mine, all of my stories except for one has disability representation. So Skies of Dripping Gold, which has a character with an intellectual disability, a different character with a chronic pain and a chronic illness, and then another character with a very severe form of dyslexia.
Okay.
And then there's Colors of Fear, which is part of my Assassin's Origin Stories series. And that has a character with chronic illness, and then the main character struggles with a form of depression. There's Flames of Courage, where also assassin related, and that has a protagonist with single-sided deafness, and her mentor is blind, and that does deal a lot with finding your place in the world and accepting yourself. And then Sounds of Deceit, also assassin related, has a side character who is a warrior who uses a cane, and I love her. And then the protagonist deals with an issue that's similar to vertigo, but like very severe form.
That would be quite interrupted to daily life.
Yes, yeah, it definitely is. And then my most recent publication, which is This Pain Inside, and that's the character that, like me, has chronic pain. And so that's my most close to my heart character, I guess, because she is basically me, only a little more emo than I am, but all of her symptoms are similar.
In any of your representations, did you have to do research on something that you were not familiar with but you wanted to represent?
Oh yeah, so I have to do a ton of research. Even when I wrote my character with chronic pain, I went and researched other people's experiences with chronic pain because, you know, I have it, but my experiences may not be the same as everybody else's, so I wanted to make sure I wasn't missing anything. So yeah, I do extensive research on any type of disability that I write about because I think that's important.
Excellent. Now, where do you find sources to do this research?
Yeah, so usually I start out by looking around and seeing if there's somebody I know. When I went to community college, I worked at my college's writing center, and I was specifically placed in a classroom that was an English class for students with various disabilities. And so through that, I got to know a lot of students and a lot of different disabilities and have good conversations that I just kind of logged away for future use.
Right, yep. Doing like pre-research for whatever happens in the future.
Yeah. And then beyond that, I just ask around and I try to find blogs and YouTube channels by people who have the disabilities that I'm researching and try and read about their experiences. Sometimes there are even like little tutorials on like, here's how you can help somebody with this specific type of disability or be an ally. And so I like to look at those to make sure I'm not missing anything. And then, you know, depending on what it is I'm writing, like right now I'm working on a character who has epilepsy. So then I'll start out on like WebMD or whatever, which I do not recommend using that as the sole source, but like I don't know very much about epilepsy, so it's a good jumping off point. And then from there I'll go deeper and talk to people with epilepsy. So
Right. Yeah. Well, and it gives you a starting point to talk with them because you're like, okay, I read that this is a thing. Is that true for you?
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
Cool.
So it is a lot, but it's definitely worth it.
Yeah. Well, and if you're an author, I kind of feel like the whole point is to take the time to make it real to your reader, even if it's going to be fantasy or sci-fi or what have you, to have the human experience be part of something really real and deep is like part of your job.
Yeah, absolutely. Like when you think about all the time that writers spend like researching how to hold a sword or you know how time travel works, like you can do that for disability as well.
Exactly. And it's far more fascinating than you would think.
Yeah, it really is.
And applicable to daily life, so you know, it's a bonus.
Yeah, that's the great thing is then you can use that knowledge to, when you're out and about, to recognize if other people need help or encouragement, and it just kind of makes you a more well-rounded person, I think, so.
Yeah. Well, awesome. Do you have any closing remarks for people about disability and writing in fiction?
Yeah, so I would just say, please do it. There needs to be more representation, and honestly, it means so much. I know to me personally, when I'm not feeling well, I read. That's, what I do. And so whenever I come across that rare book where I am somehow represented, it just makes a huge difference, and it helps me feel strong and gives me hope. And I know other people with disabilities and chronic illnesses feel the same.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so if you can be the author that gives that feeling to somebody else, that's incredible. So go for it. I'm cheering you on.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk about this, and who knows, maybe we'll be on again sometime. And I especially love your blue hair, so it just livens up everything about this whole chat. I love it.
Well, thank you.
All right, so thank you so much for your time. And
thank you so much. This is such a great topic, so thank you for hosting it.
Perfect. Let's get the word out there.
Yes.